And I was standing there, and the doctor came in and started talking, and he said, well, let me show you what's happened. And he took me over to her x-rays on the wall, and I saw her skull, and I saw her brain, and I saw little white things inside, and a bullet right in the middle of her head. And I said, you know, because it was white and shaped just like a bullet. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, that's the bullet. I said, what's all that white stuff? He said, that's her skull fragmented. And I said, okay, can you get it out? And he said, no. I said, what do you mean, no? You down in there, pull it out, you know? Come on now. You know, people have done things before like this, haven't they? He said, you don't understand. This one's not going to make it. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, all that white stuff is fragmented bone. Her brain hemorrhaged, and she's not going to make it. Your daughter is only on life support. And I stood there, and it was the weirdest thing. It felt like this black thing came down, straight down through me, and went whoosh, hit the ground, spread out, went back up, went over me, and came down, and I passed out. And I woke up laying on a gurney in the emergency room, and I looked around, and it was real. I hadn't dreamed it. So I said, oh my God, I gotta tell my son, I gotta tell my son. And Fernando, I mean, he was already freaking out, screaming, gee, my wife, oh, my wife, where's my, you know, and just going on. And I'm like, I can't deal with him. I have to take care of my son. And his family showed up. And so they kind of surrounded him and his friends. And I'm like, how am I going to tell my son? Because I had to go out and tell my son, and in the meantime, they had asked me about organ donation. And I said, of course, if there's no hope and she's not going to make it, of course, she would want to help other people live. So they said, well, you have to sign some papers, and a priest was there, and the priest prayed over her, and I went outside to tell my son, and I was standing there at the emergency room entry going, how do I say this? And I looked over, and a whole crowd of like 20 people were walking up into the emergency room, and I looked again, and I recognized them all. Well, at this time, I was 5 years clean and sober when this happened to me, when my daughter was killed. And when I looked over, I used to live right around the corner from this hospital, and that was the people from the first AA meeting I ever went to. And they were all coming up to go to a meeting that night at Eden Hospital. And I went over to them, and they said, what are you doing here? And I told them what happened, because they knew my daughter, and they all started, you know, having their reactions to it. And I said, look, I need your help, because when I tell my son, I have to go back inside and sign documents, and I need you to be with my son. So they said, of course. So they canceled the AA meeting that night, and they all surrounded me and my son. When I told him, and he broke down, and they held him up, and they held me up, and they told me, okay, go do what you have to do. We're taking care of your son for you. You don't have to worry about it. So I went back inside and signed the papers. And then I came back outside, and I had to get my son and go tell my dad. Man, that was hard to tell my dad. Right before this had all happened, the funniest thing that happened was I had turned my life and my will over to the care of God and my children and everything. And so this happened right after that. I had the vision, and Jasmine went, you know, she was killed. And so what happened was, I told my dad, and I had to do the whole thing of calling everybody and telling everybody. And that is so hard, because you have to let everybody know that knew you. You have to go through her things. Whew, that was hard, to go through her stuff, but you got to, you know. And I said, well, I saw that God gave me this thing where I was like numb when it first happened. It was like it had happened to somebody else, and I was just going through the motions. So I saw that, and I said, well, I might as well do it now. So I went through her stuff and donated a lot of her things, and It was not easy. It was not easy to do it, but I knew I had to do it. And telling all the friends and everything, and like I say, it was just unreal. And then I went through a thing where had to go through the holidays because it happened November 25th, and so now I have to go through Christmas. I have to go through Halloween. That was her favorite holiday. Then I had to go through the Christmas, and then the New Year's, and her birthday, and all of this stuff, and Valentine's Day, and everything was a first that I had to go through. And it was really difficult to go through it. I went at Christmas time because I didn't want to take away from my son his Christmas. So I went to my dad's house and I got my Christmas decorations from his basement. And I know this, I'm not crazy, okay? Unusual things started happening. I went and took my Christmas decorations from my dad's basement, walked down the stairs, put them in the back of my truck, opened up the box, pulled out a red envelope. On the front of it said Grandpa in cursive. I opened it up and it was a Christmas card from my daughter to my dad. I put it in his mailbox and left. I was visiting a girlfriend of mine's house and I was sitting in her living room. And all of a sudden I got up, walked over to her bookcase, pulled out a book, opened it up, and there was a letter in it from my daughter to my son. I guess I had borrowed the book from her at some time, and Jasmine put that in there. And it was Jasmine's writing. And she was teasing my son because his name was Max. At the time we called him Max. And she said, "Dear Maxie Pad." And basically it was, don't live your life the way I did. Make something of yourself. Do something with your life. Love always, Jasmine. And I gave it to my son. And things like this happened a few times here and there. Unusual things like this that I just didn't question. I just went through and moved through it and kept going. My son went on a voluntary suicide, and that's when you try to get yourself killed. I was in with Victims Assistance Program. They were paying for us to have therapy. I was doing EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprogramming is one thing that they call it. And that was helping me a lot. Victims Assistance was very supportive of me. They didn't push into my life, but they were there. They would contact me and see if I needed help with anything and ask me how they could help me. And that was good because I didn't need to have someone pushing into my life and trying to make things okay for me, because that's an insult. No one can make anything okay for you. Your child has been killed. Bottom line. And there's nothing, like people say, how you were 5 years clean and sober when this happened. How could you not go back out and drink? And I said, if it would have brought her back, I would have stripped down naked and drank until I passed out. I said, but it won't bring her back. There's nothing I can do to bring her back. And then I started telling people at the meetings, because I was in AA and still am, but I would tell people in the group when they were on the pity party and having at it, and then I would share my story about Jasmine and say, okay, well, what's your story now? Why are you going back out? I've stayed clean and sober through this. I haven't taken any antidepressants, no drugs, no alcohol, no mood alternating substances at all. And I'm going through this at 5 years clean and sober. So what's so bad in your life that makes you have to go back out and put the bottle of the drug to your mouth? And they're like, nothing. How can you argue with that? So I started taking it and trying to do something with it other than having it consuming me. And I went into a thing like I told you, like an amnesia type thing. And I went through a place where sometimes I would start feeling better. This is before the 7th month period. Sometimes I'd start feeling better, and then I'd feel bad and I'd feel guilty because I felt better. And something in my head would say, how can you be happy? Your child was murdered. How can you be this? How can you that? How can you that? There was a voice inside me that kept saying these things to me. And so I went to a minister, and she said, you know, God would not want you to stay miserable. And so look at this as something that's telling you that the answer to that question is, why not? God would not want you to stay miserable your whole life. And now you're having little pieces of bliss coming in, which is allowing you to start moving into your life being happy again. And don't negate it, and embrace it. So I started allowing myself to be happy again, now and then, little pieces. And it kind of was like Jasmine and her death took up my whole life. Every waking moment, I had my friends staying with me. I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't be alone in my head. It was overwhelming. And so what started happening was life started coming in, whereas before it was like this, all the time thinking about Jasmine, all the time. And then life started coming in, and then something else would come in, and then something else and something else. So there started becoming spaces of time between the memory of Jasmine and what happened. And it still wasn't easy, but I did it. Sometimes I would lay down in my closet in the dark, when I could take the dark, and I would feel the pain, because a minister friend of mine, also another minister friend, said, just feel the pain, don't fight it, and go through it and allow it to come in, and when it reaches a point of being too much, pray to God to remove it. And so that's what I started doing, and it hurt so bad. It felt like I had 50 pounds or more on my heart, and like I couldn't breathe. And I'd lay down on the cool floor in the closet, and I would just close my eyes, and I'd just feel the feelings, because that was like a safe room. I'd feel the feelings and go through what I had to go through, and then when it became too much, I would just say, all right, God, let me give it up to you. Let me get back into life. And then I would come out, open the door, and come out back into life. And I went back to work. I stayed off work for a while, and I went back to work. And a man came walking into my workplace one day, and he said, we caught him. And I said, who? And he said, the guy that killed Jasmine. And I said, how'd you find him? He said he was in jail, and he was bragging about it, and his cellmate turned him in. Okay, so I said, So he says, and we're going to trial, so you need to get ready for it. So I started getting my head wrapped around that. Now it became real again, okay? This is how it happens. It's too real, too real, too real. Ooh, can't deal with it. Go somewhere else. And then you get your life going, and then something comes along, and here it is, right up in your face again. Too real, too real, too real. You can't ignore it. And then it's back into life again. So it goes like in waves, but the tide goes out, and the waves don't come in so strong, and they don't come in so far. And then pretty soon, you start having a life again. And then it'll come at you again. Somehow, you know. I don't know, it just does. And so he says, the inspector, detective, he said, you have to get ready for court.